there was something that happened the day before the internet came on. Tuesday, was it Tuesday or Wednesday? Wednesday, when the electricity came on. I woke up in the morning, and the other person in the other room was trying to set up the internet. Well, it wouldn't set up for me. There were disputations about whether I was going to allow for that kind of porting, and I didn't. So it took a while for the internet to come up. And not only that, my internet has been incredibly, incredibly slow. Okay. Weather related, except it's not. There was a bill, two bills that were passed. I have a formal report on this. I attempted to contact people. Two bills, tax bills, that were passed. All of the co sponsors were Democrats. Now, when it got passed later, it had already gone through a period where it was active under another metric coding scheme. The bills were S82 and H299. 82, no, I think it was 399. The reason this is important is because there was a series of events where what started out first as women, mothers, were appearing after having an intercession with the Health and Human Services Provider Network, rather rehabilitation facilities, convalescence homes, or in the case that I personally witnessed, domestic violence shelters, where women who were mothers had their ankle broken. And it was broken in a specific way that required a particular kind of prosthesis or medical device that they had to wear while they were healing their broken foot. Sometime later, I had the experience of watching young women who had a very specific background and had a relationship with a community that was European in origin go through a series where within 2 months I saw at least four young girls, young women, who looked between the ages of 14 and 17. My understanding is they were probably either in the process of just getting their driver's license or they were going through some sort of formal driver's instruction program that would have required them to get the certificate with the state of Texas. They broke their ankles and they were wearing the same device. I don't think they were alone. Sometime after that, very actually around that time, I saw a woman who worked for the county. She worked for the county. She worked in a county administrative building in Harris County. She was the same age as another woman at the same area who was older, but she was the same age range. She even looked the same. She also had that boot on her foot. They were specifically women, specifically women, and I had a theory that it had to do with who either their father or their grandfather was. That somebody was leaning on their father or their grandfather, potentially their mother, but that's not what the intent was. The intent was to lean on the father in order to retract the bonus that was his daughter. And the way that they retracted or the way that they engaged around that bonus was to break her foot with that specific code that was directly referenced to those tax bills. So that then she would have to get medical treatment that itself would have certain kinds of code. And then those codes would be allowed to be connected to derivative agreements, which would then make her and perhaps her father or her grandfather through her available for some form of extortion or some form of lien under the auspices that it had to do with holding corporate executives accountable for attempting to acquire inordinate or specific kinds of bonuses. Now, I used to work in compliance for the public health department. Part of my job, in addition to verifying the certifications for physicians and providers that were legally allowed to bill Medicare and Social Security specifically, but bill within the public health network. One of the things I had to do is had to do research on the changes to the ICD-10 codes, the diagnostic codes that are used when one treats an illness. That is connected to how it would be categorized and different manners of assessing kinds of correlations with insurance billing. Now, something was happening at the end of 2013 concerning the possibilities related to requesting and submitting billings related to Medicare specifically. But this was not a change isolated to Medicare. Specific kinds of codes could potentially be clumped together, especially if one is trying to process a billing claim for a medical device. These particular medical devices, I contend and have seen, do not get produced and distributed by many people. It's a specific kind of medical device someone would need in order to go through a treatment regimen related to healing from that kind of injury. I already know practically, literally, that you can remotely trigger a bone break using manipulation of radio frequencies. As a matter of fact, I have twice been in situations where someone attempted to break my bones in a specific manner to try to compel me to go to the doctor to get medical treatment. I have my own way of understanding, anticipating this, and allowing for a form of either alteration of the environment or my own vibrational levels, or being able to address it in a manner that does not allow for its successful execution. But I don't believe that a majority of people are even aware of this phenomena, and without the awareness and without allowing us to have consciousness of its possibilities, then we are even greater dispossessed of a defense against its actual implementation and occurrence in our lives. If you understand you're being sonically attacked with an effort to put pressure on a particular part of your body, and that the anticipation is that it will create a kind of stress that will compel you or allow for a lack of focus so that you trip down the stairs and end up breaking your foot. If you know that that's a process that can actually be engaged in a manner of attempting to remotely break somebody's bone to get them into the hospital so that then they can set up a bunch of derivatives on their medical treatment and billing, then you can identify it if it's being used against you, or if you have an anticipation or you have an alert that it's being used in connection with somebody in your environment. And there are steps you can take, and there are things you can do to either adjust your movement or adjust your behavior, what you're doing, or actually engage with it as it's attempted for occurrence so that it doesn't succeed. This is absolutely what I personally have practically done. This is what could have been done. But there's also the next question and concern of why is somebody engaging a process where they think it's acceptable to strategically break the bones of specific people in order to require them at specific times to go in and get medical treatment of a particular kind. Now, in the beginning of 2020, actually around 2020, around the time that they were making the declaration of the state of emergency concerning COVID-19, I put together a digest, or rather a report, that could have been run through the National Institutes of Health in order to verify my accusations. And then an effort could have been made to cross-reference those reports with efforts to try to get some other kind of comparable medical treatment, specifically related to allegations that somehow people had been victimized or had been exposed to COVID-19 and required a particular kind of treatment, including potentially a treatment that would try to enlist them to provide their own genetic materials in the development of some sort of treatment or vaccine. For instance, there was a announcement for a protracted period of time about how people who had survived COVID 19 were being asked to donate blood plasma so that their blood plasma could be used to help treat other people who had COVID 19. Now, this was for a period of time that this was in the press, and they were doing this. And now it is not as popular or as, pronouncedly discussed in the media what this meant or what the results of the early efforts were. But this was not something isolated to COVID 19. I'm not going to discuss it now, but the situation connected to specifically the United States' relationship with blood plasma donations is something that comparable that I understand to other things the United States does that are different from the rest of the world, but that it has attempted to repeatedly impose upon the rest of the world are standards around what is acceptable in terms of frequency or kind of blood plasma donation systematology. And so these were things that were already being tested and were already being coercively exported for a protracted period of time before they came into the media as somehow being connected to some sort of need we had now to engage in something identified as novel or engage in something that was heretofore just fringe but might be exactly the kind of treatment we need in order to deal with this incomprehensible thing that we were utterly unprepared for. That is not the case. By the time I encountered, for instance, those young women that were getting their ankles broken, I knew that's what it was because I had already experienced it personally when the methodology to effectuate the kind of precision I saw in that particular environment had already been tested on people you're probably not supposed to know much about. Having an experience where you have to go to a domestic violence shelter is supposed to be confidential. There's matters related to the woman's safety involved, right? So if they're testing out electronic weapons regimes at a domestic violence shelter and providing her with the best medical treatment when she slips in the parking lot and breaks her ankle, well, that's just part of that confidential treatment or that confidential system they set up at that domestic violence shelter that's helping those poor women that've been subjected to that terrible ordeal, right? I mean, that's the reason why nobody thought it was important to do more investigation related to these very unacceptable activities at domestic violence shelters. It's about her confidential information. You don't want to encroach upon her privacy, right? Actually, that's not the case. They've been testing this and they've been rolling it out for a long time, and it brings up the question of what they're actually doing with this alleged vaccine. Nobody in over 15 years has called a commission of inquiry, much less presented charges for a prosecution of what was done with that gubernatorial commission regarding bioengineering, biotechnology, biomedicine, and nanotechnology. Nobody's done anything on that. As a matter of fact, nobody even brought up what would be justifiable concerns about its supplanting out of the small business code into the other areas of the Texas government code that it is now residing. Nobody brought up the fact that when it came into being, it replaced the introduction to the Texas Small Business Code. It's been 15 years. Now we're in this situation that we're in. I'm very concerned that the next phase of this nuclear terrorism is going to be specifically connected to what they intend to do with the vaccines. And that is what this is. They're resetting the grid in Texas. And they're not just resetting the grid in Texas, they're resetting the grid in other parts of the United States. Did they do a 2-in-1 and they're putting Texas in the ping point? Why would they do that? Why would they have allowed that to occur? That's what this is. Now, it's the kind of thing that if somebody had been honest during this time frame and discussed it as it is, which is terrorism, it's a biological attack. People are being put into a situation where they're being armed The question is for whom? If it's just economic warfare and they're just going to use somebody's health or try to synchronize people's lives so that they're running concurrent processes and they're all nicely choreographed to meet benchmarks in somebody's investment portfolio, even if that is the intent, why was that not discussed? Let me tell you, I'm pretty sure most, if not all, of those young girls whose ankles you broke knew about it on that level. Did you bribe them? After you tortured their daughters, did you offer them a bribe to keep their mouths shut and give you their beautiful young daughters of a particular racial background and a particular income bracket right of a first refusal to what you intend to impose upon the rest of the young girls and boys? I believe that's exactly what you did. Now, if they had responded at the time in terms of what it was, which was an attempt to try to extort members of their community after torturing their children, we'd be in one situation. But let me just say to you, that's what they did to my mother. They broke my mother's ankle as the first round on that capital outlay process. And I'm responding to it as if I'm the daughter of a mother you tortured. And you can't give me a bribe to co-conspire to torture other people's children. And that's what this is. So now we need to move forward and we need to respond appropriately. My question is, where are those airstrikes? Where's the National Guard? Where are the people in the Texas military that actually understand what they were called to do, as opposed to what? What is the military doing right now? This is not a time to be trying to figure out the juiciest contract you can get yourself included in while they're doing this parsing out. Especially if you're in the military, you already know these contracts are outlays for extended periods of time. If you already got a contract 10 years ago or 20 years ago and thought now was going to be your payoff, very, very, very bad idea, assholes. You don't have the insurance to back that up. You have no right to try to set up another round of anybody. It's not going to be successful anyway. So if there's anybody that was in that position, you need to get your P's and Q's in order and you need to move immediately, because you're not going to be in a situation where you're going to get to watch them try to remotely program young girls and boys to engage in acts that delight you or stimulate that part of your brain that was allowed to be overcompensated while the rest of us were supposed to be subjected to some sort of peonage. You're the first line of response, and they know it. If you agree to co-conspire with them and play into prurience, unfortunately, that economy has been tapped out. I highly recommend you take this time and you consider your next actions appropriately. Even if your little nuclear girl fuckbot program had potential, what did you do with it? What did you do with it? It's more than 48 hours after the electricity went on. It's more than 24 hours after you guys should already have responded. What did you do? Because we're the same damn place we were before. So even if that was your aspiration, you defaulted. You guys defaulted.